Have you ever wondered what you would do if someone told you that you didn't belong right in front of a crowd? Imagine paying for a first-class seat, showing your boarding pass, your ID, and still being told to move to the back of the plane. Not because of a mistake, but because of an assumption. Now picture this: you can stay silent and swallow the humiliation, or you can stand up, knowing the whole world might soon be watching. What choice would you make? This is the true story of Marcus Grant, a black CEO who was ordered out of his seat on Amerisky Flight 847. Calm, steady. And with millions of dollars of power behind him, he made one phone call that froze a $100 million deal and turned his humiliation into a movement. If it were you in that seat, would you have the strength to stay calm, to hold the line for yourself, and for everyone who has ever been told you don't belong? Stay with me. Because what happened in 1A didn't just change one man's flight. It changed an entire industry. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the full story. Sir, you don't belong in this seat. The words sliced through the pristine silence of Amerisky Flight 847 like a blade against glass. Passengers turned their heads. Some pretended not to notice, eyes darting back to glowing tablets and folded newspapers. Others leaned forward, curious, sensing the tension of something out of place. The cabin was bathed in soft golden light. Leather seats gleamed under the overhead fixtures. The faint aroma of brewed coffee mingled with the sterile scent of polished metal. Every detail whispered luxury, exclusivity, and privilege, everything that Marcus Grant had legitimately paid for. He looked up slowly from the worn leather briefcase resting on his lap. Marcus was 45 years old, with a presence that radiated calm authority. He wore a simple navy suit, pressed but not flashy, paired with a modest Seiko watch that had been with him for decades. No Rolex, no Armani, nothing about him screamed power. And yet, the power he carried could have purchased the very aircraft he sat in without a dent in his accounts. The flight attendant, Emily Carter, stood stiffly at his side. Her polished nails gripped the edge of the seat in row 1A as if clinging to authority itself. The smile on her lips was tight, strained, and her tone left little room for interpretation. Marcus didn't move. He simply raised his gaze to meet hers. His eyes were dark, steady, and calm, too calm. That stillness often unsettled people, as if he knew something they didn't. "I believe this is my seat," he replied softly, his voice carrying the weight of practiced patience. Passengers around him shifted uncomfortably. In row 2A, a silver-haired oil executive named Charles Whitmore sipped from a crystal glass, his expensive cufflinks catching the light. He glanced at Marcus with mild irritation, as though the inconvenience of the moment had already spoiled his evening. Emily's smile tightened further. "Let me just verify this in our system," she said, her words smooth, but laced with doubt. Marcus handed her his boarding pass. First class, seat 1A, booked 3 days prior with his personal black card. Everything in order. Still, she hesitated. Her fingers danced across the screen of her device, taking longer than necessary. Each second dragged out like a silent accusation. Behind him, the boarding line slowed. Impatience stirred, whispers rising like steam. A man muttered about missing his connection. A woman adjusted her pearls, sighing audibly. Marcus said nothing. He had endured delays of this nature before, not of flights, but of recognition. He knew this routine too well, the second-guessing, the subtle suspicion, the tiny tests that stacked upon each other. Years of success hadn't erased them. He glanced out the window. The sky was dimming, streaks of fading sunlight cutting across Dallas-Fort Worth's runways. In 3 hours, this plane would land in New York, where Marcus had a board meeting with Amerisky's CEO, Robert Hayes. On the agenda, the renewal of a $100 million credit facility. The deal was critical, not only for the airline's survival, but also for shaping Reed Financial's aviation portfolio. Yet here he sat, treated as though he had wandered into a place he didn't belong. Emily returned the boarding pass. Her smile had not softened. "Please remain seated while we complete additional checks," she said curtly. She turned away, her posture rigid, her heels clicking like gavel strikes against the polished aisle. Marcus exhaled slowly. He rested his hands on the briefcase, his thumb brushing against the scuffed leather handle. That case had been with him since his early days as a young associate, hustling through airports with little more than ambition in his pocket. Now it held contracts worth hundreds of millions, legal briefs, and private notes. It was both relic and weapon, a reminder of the distance he had traveled and the battles yet to fight. He glanced across the aisle. A middle-aged couple, Linda and Judge Thomas Miller, exchanged uneasy looks. The judge's eyes, seasoned by years on the bench, narrowed in recognition of what was unfolding. Linda placed a hand on her husband's arm, whispering something under her breath. The hum of the engines filled the silence that followed. Marcus's heart rate did not quicken. Instead, he felt the familiar tug of an old internal debate. Should I let this pass? For the sake of peace, or should I stand firm? For the sake of dignity, not only mine, but for everyone who has been told the same words in countless ways. You don't belong here. A soft chime rang as more passengers settled into their seats. The cabin crew bustled with efficiency, passing out warm towels, offering drinks, checking overhead bins. Yet around Marcus, an invisible bubble of tension lingered. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Memories flickered the first time a teacher doubted his test score. The bank clerk who once questioned his signature. The restaurant where his card was inspected longer than others. Each memory was a grain of sand, and together they formed a desert he had walked through his entire life. When he opened his eyes, they were steady again, calm, ready. Marcus didn't know that in the next 2 hours, this very moment would cascade into a storm that shook not just this aircraft, but an entire corporation. What began with 4 words from a flight attendant would end with the freezing of a $100 million deal. The stage was set. The world just didn't know it yet. The cabin had settled into a fragile calm, but inside Marcus Grant's mind a different current was moving. He leaned back into the leather headrest of seat 1A and let his eyes wander. Not to the glowing screens or glossy magazines around him, but deeper, into memories stitched into the fabric of his life. For anyone else, this flight might have been routine a business trip from Dallas to New York, a short 3-hour hop. But for Marcus, flights had always carried a complicated weight. Airplanes symbolized progress, opportunity, and the very success his younger self once thought impossible. Yet they also reminded him of a truth that shadowed even the highest achievements sometimes. No matter how high you climbed, you were still seen as out of place. Marcus was born in Houston, the son of a postal worker and a school librarian. His earliest memories were filled with the steady rhythm of his father's footsteps after long shifts, and the soft scratch of his mother's pen grading papers late into the night. They didn't have much, but they had discipline, books, and faith. His father used to say, "Son, dignity is the one thing no one can hand you and no one can take from you. You guard it like treasure." Those words had guided Marcus when he was the only black student in his honors math class. when professors raised their brows at his essays, when colleagues mistook him for the intern instead of the lead analyst. They guided him through Harvard Business School, where he carried more doubts than luggage, and later through the sleepless years of building Grant Capital into a billion-dollar powerhouse. But it wasn't just drive or brilliance that sustained him. It was patience, the art of holding fire behind calm eyes. People often mistook his composure for weakness. They didn't realize it was the steel beneath the surface. Tonight's flight was supposed to be simple, a chance to review final documents before the next morning's board meeting. The airline, Ameris Sky, had come to him in need. Their expansion plan hinged on renewing a $100 million line of credit. Without it, their ambitious fleet overhaul would stall, and their stock would slide. Marcus had every reason to approve the deal. It was profitable, secure, and strategically aligned with his firm's aviation portfolio. Still, something in him resisted quick signatures. He had seen how corporations treated people like him when cameras weren't rolling and microphones weren't live. So he watched, waited, and tested not just numbers, but character. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were pages marked with handwritten notes in the margin, underlines circling key phrases like diversity metrics, workforce audits, and long-term equity. Marcus believed business was more than balance sheets. It was a reflection of values. He had told his team earlier that week, "We don't just invest in companies, we invest in cultures. A rotten culture will eat through any profit." As he scanned the notes, his mind drifted back to the look in Emily Carter's eyes when she said he didn't belong. He recognized that look. It was the same look a landlord once gave his mother when she tried to rent an apartment in a better neighborhood. It was the same look he saw on a bank officer's face when he applied for his first business loan, a look that silently calculated worth based on skin, not substance. He exhaled slowly, reminding himself of his father's words, "Guard your dignity. Don't let them strip it away." Across the aisle, Judge Thomas Miller adjusted his glasses and leaned toward his wife. His voice was low, but Marcus caught fragments. "You see what's happening, don't you?" Linda squeezed her husband's hand, her lips pressed tight. She knew this wasn't just a seating dispute. It was something larger, something heavier. 2 rows behind. Charles Whitmore chuckled softly at something on his phone, oblivious or indifferent. He had the air of a man used to being on the winning side of every interaction. He ordered another drink without a second glance at Marcus. For Marcus, these contrasts told a familiar story. Indifference from some, discomfort from others, resistance from a few, and then, every once in a while, the rare spark of courage, someone willing to speak, to witness. He wondered who, on this flight, might step into that role. The plane door closed with a hiss. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker, welcoming passengers aboard Ameris Sky Flight 847 to New York. As he spoke, Marcus studied the faces around him. Some were buried in work, others in sleep. He thought of his own employees back in Houston, young analysts pulling long hours, many of them minorities who looked to him not only as a boss, but as proof that it was possible. He wondered what they would think if they saw him now, questioned about his right to sit where his ticket said he belonged. Would they feel discouraged, or would they see the lesson he had always tried to teach strength isn't in avoiding the storm? It's in standing tall within it. Emily Carter returned, her expression unchanged. She bent slightly, her voice low but sharp enough for nearby passengers to hear. "We're still waiting on confirmation. For now, please remain where you are." Marcus nodded. "Of course," he said, his tone even, but inside, his thoughts sharpened. Confirmation. What more confirmation did they need? The pass was scanned, the manifest recorded. He knew the truth sometimes. Bureaucracy was just a mask for bias. He closed the folder in his lap and placed it back into the briefcase. He didn't need notes right now. He needed clarity. As the plane began its slow taxi to the runway, Marcus's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant back in Houston lit up the screen. "Good luck tomorrow. Everyone's counting on you." He smiled faintly. They had no idea that the test wasn't waiting in New York. It was already unfolding at 30,000 feet. And as the engines roared louder, pushing the plane forward, Marcus made a quiet decision. He would not let this pass. Not tonight. Not this time. Because sometimes silence was complicity. And Marcus Grant had never built his life on silence. The plane leveled at 30,000 feet. The seatbelt sign dimmed with a soft chime. A hush spread through the cabin, punctuated only by the hum of the engines and the clink of glasses as attendants began their service. Emily Carter reappeared at the front of first class. Her stride was brisk, her posture deliberate. In her hands she carried a silver tray, glasses of sparkling water balanced neatly. She moved through the aisle, smiling warmly at a middle-aged man in 2C, bending just slightly as she placed the glass on his tray table. She laughed politely at his small joke. When she reached Marcus in 1A, her smile faltered. She set the glass down without a word. The placement was sharp, almost careless, water sloshing against the rim. Marcus noticed, though he said nothing. He adjusted the glass, wiping a small drop that had spilled onto the armrest. Calm, always calm. From the corner of his eye, he saw Charles Whitmore receive his drink in a crystal tumbler, garnished with lime, presented with a small napkin folded like origami. Charles chuckled, lifted the glass, and winked at Emily as though they shared some inside joke. Marcus felt the difference, not in the glass itself, but in the gesture, the ritual of respect given to one man and withheld from another. Emily returned moments later with a tablet in hand. She leaned closer, her voice pitched low but not low enough to be private. "Sir, I'll need to see your boarding pass again, and an ID, company policy." Several passengers glanced up. A murmur traveled down the aisle. Marcus met her gaze. "You already scanned it at the gate," he said evenly. "Is there an issue?" Emily shifted. Her smile was taut. Just a random verification. Marcus handed her the pass. She studied it longer than necessary, her brows knitting as though she were deciphering a foreign language. Please," she pressed. He pulled out his wallet, sliding his driver's license into her hand. She examined it as though she expected to find a counterfeit. Behind her, Charles Whitmore smirked. Judge Thomas Miller straightened in his seat. His voice carried the authority of decades on the bench. "Excuse me, miss. I don't see you asking anyone else for their ID." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she kept her eyes fixed on the license. "Just following protocol." She muttered. Linda Miller whispered something to her husband. Her eyes filled with quiet disapproval. Emily finally handed the documents back. "Thank you. We'll sort this out." Her words lingered like smoke, leaving a trace of doubt for everyone within earshot. Marcus tucked the ID back into his wallet. His hands were steady, but inside, a storm began to stir. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the familiar ache of recognition. He remembered being 22, interviewing for his first analyst job, and hearing the recruiter say, "You just don't seem like a fit for our culture." He remembered standing in a luxury store years later, Credit card declined, not because of insufficient funds, he could have bought the store outright, but because the cashier needed manager approval. Every memory pressed against him like stones in his pocket, weighing him down. Now, here, at 30,000 feet, the same script replayed, different stage, same lines. James Walker, the senior flight attendant, appeared at Emily's side. His frame was tall, his hair trimmed close, his tone clipped with authority. "What's going on here?" he asked. Emily gestured toward Marcus. "Passenger in 1A. The system flagged a discrepancy. Marcus turned to him calmly. "There's no discrepancy. My ticket is valid. My ID matches." James studied him, eyes narrowing, then glanced at Charles Whitmore, who shrugged as if to say, "You see, doesn't add up." The senior attendant's jaw tightened. "Sir, we just want to make sure everything is in order. People pay a lot for these seats." The words hung heavy, not just in the air, but in the implication. "People like you don't usually sit here." Marcus inhaled slowly. He could feel eyes on him now, dozens of them, weighing, judging. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the injustice but unwilling to intervene. Others watched with mild curiosity, sipping drinks, entertained by the unfolding theater. Judge Miller leaned forward. "This man has shown his boarding pass and ID. Unless you plan to check the entire cabin, I suggest you stop harassing him." James' lips tightened. "Sir, please mind your own seat." Marcus raised a hand slightly, signaling calm. He didn't want the judge to escalate in his defense. He knew how quickly people who spoke up became targets themselves. Instead, he turned his gaze back to James. His voice was steady, deliberate. "If you have questions, check the manifest. My name is there. My ticket is there. That should be enough." James shifted his weight, clearly unsatisfied. "We'll confirm with the captain," he said, his tone final, as though confirmation from Marcus's own documents was insufficient. They walked away, leaving behind a trail of murmurs and side glances. Marcus looked out the window again. The sky was dark now, stars barely visible through the thin veil of atmosphere. He thought of the meeting waiting in New York, of Robert Hayes in the boardroom, of the $100 million decision that would shape not just numbers on a ledger, but thousands of jobs and futures. And then he thought of the message his assistant had sent: "Everyone's counting on you." He closed his eyes, not to escape but to gather, to hold the storm at bay until the right moment to release it. Because Marcus Grant knew something the others didn't. This wasn't just about a seat. It never was. It was about dignity, about the quiet line a man draws when enough is enough. And though they didn't know it yet, the line had just been drawn. Dinner service began. The rich aroma of roasted chicken and buttered rolls filled the cabin. Silverware clinked softly as trays were lowered and glasses refilled. For most passengers, this was just another evening in the sky. But for Marcus Grant, the weight of scrutiny pressed down heavier than the altitude outside. Emily Carter returned. Her tone sharpened. Her smile of veneer stretched too thin. "Mr. Grant," she said, as though reluctant to use his name, "the captain has been informed of the situation. Until we get his approval, we'll need you to answer a few more questions." Marcus turned his head slowly, calm but firm. "I've shown you my boarding pass. I've given you my ID. What questions remain?" Her eyes darted to James Walker, who had stepped up beside her. James held a clipboard like a shield, his shoulders squared. "Sir," he began, voice clipped, "we need to verify the method of payment for this ticket. For high-value seats, sometimes fraud occurs. Marcus studied him, measuring his words. Around them, forks paused mid-air. The hum of the engine seemed louder in the silence. "Are you asking if I could afford this seat?" Marcus asked, his voice even, though inside his chest the storm swelled. "It's standard procedure," James replied, though no one else in first class had been asked the same. From 2 rows back, Charles Whitmore chuckled. "Come on, folks, you can't blame them. You don't see this every day." He raised his glass as if to punctuate the insult. Marcus's eyes flicked toward him briefly, then back to James. He would not give Charles the satisfaction of a reaction. Judge Thomas Miller shifted forward, his tone measured but firm. "This is harassment," he said, addressing James directly. "I've flown enough to know the difference between protocol and profiling." James's jaw tightened. "Sir, please let us handle this." Linda Miller leaned closer to her husband, whispering, "Tom, they're not going to listen." But Marcus heard her, and she was right. This wasn't about verification. This was about doubt manufactured, imposed, relentless. Marcus reached into his briefcase, pulling out a sleek wallet. He placed his black card on the tray table, the metal surface catching the cabin light. "Here," he said simply, "since proof of identity and payment seem insufficient. Perhaps this will convince you." Emily picked it up delicately, turning it over in her fingers. The embossed name gleamed, Marcus A. Grant. She froze for a second, perhaps realizing the absurdity of questioning a man whose name was etched into a card reserved for the world's wealthiest travelers. But she masked it quickly, handing it to James. James scribbled something on his clipboard, pretending to be busy. "We'll have this checked," he muttered. Marcus placed the card back into his wallet when it was returned. His movements were deliberate, slow, as though each second was a reminder, "I will not be rushed. I will not be diminished." Inside, though, the old debate raged again. He thought of his employees back home, young black men and women who looked up to him. He thought of his father's voice telling him dignity was treasure, and he asked himself, am I protecting dignity by staying quiet or betraying it? The answer came when James leaned in closer, lowering his voice but loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Sir, you should consider moving to another seat until this is resolved. It might be easier for everyone." Marcus met his eyes. Steady, unblinking. "No," he said simply. The word landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through the cabin. Passengers shifted, sensing the escalation. Phones appeared, subtle at first, then blatant camera lenses peeking above seatbacks. Charles Whitmore smirked. "You're making a scene, friend. Sometimes it's better to just go along." Marcus turned his head, his voice calm but clear. "Justice has never come from going along." The silence after that was thick. Even the clinking of silverware had stopped. Emily crossed her arms, her frustration visible now. "If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to involve security upon landing." Marcus leaned back in his seat, hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. "Then do what you must." His calm unnerved them more than anger ever could. Judge Miller raised his voice now, no longer able to contain himself. "This is outrageous. You're threatening to remove a paying passenger without cause. I will testify to what I've seen here tonight." Linda placed a hand on his arm, steadying him, her eyes flicking toward Marcus with quiet solidarity. The hum of phones recording grew louder, a digital chorus documenting every word. One passenger whispered, "This is going viral," as if announcing the weather. Marcus sat still, his thoughts sharpening like glass. He had spent his life preparing for battles in boardrooms, not aisles. Yet here he was, reduced to proving his worth over a seat he had already earned. But he knew something the crew didn't. This wasn't going to end the way they thought. Because Marcus Grant wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who held the pen over a $100 million deal that Amerisky couldn't afford to lose. And soon, the world would know it. The cabin lights dimmed as dinner trays were cleared away. Most passengers settled into a rhythm of quiet conversation, earbuds or glowing screens. Yet at the front of first class, tension lingered like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Emily Carter returned once more, this time with a sharper edge in her step. She bent slightly toward Marcus Grant, her voice low but sharp enough for surrounding rows to hear. "Mr. Grant, the captain has confirmed we cannot finalize your status in this seat without further checks. Until then, we'll need you to relocate to an open seat in economy." Gas rippled through the nearby passengers. A woman in 3B turned to her husband, whispering, "Did she just say economy?" Marcus sat still, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His eyes, calm but firm, rose to meet hers. "I purchased this ticket. It is valid. I am not moving." James Walker stepped forward, standing over Marcus with a clipboard tucked against his chest. His voice carried the authority of someone used to compliance. "Sir, refusal to follow crew instructions is a violation of FAA regulations. If you do not comply, we will arrange for security to remove you upon landing." Marcus inhaled slowly, steadying the storm inside. He spoke with measured calm, every word deliberate. "You are asking me to give up a seat I paid for, despite having shown valid documents. You have not asked anyone else in this cabin to do the same. That is not procedure. That is discrimination." Silence stretched, heavy and electric. From 2 rows back, Charles Whitmore leaned into the aisle, smirking. "Just let it go. Friend, you're making this harder than it has to be." His voice carried a casual cruelty, the kind of dismissal Marcus had heard 1,000 times before. Judge Thomas Miller shot him a glare. "Mr. Whitmore, that's enough." He turned to the crew. "This man has complied with every request. What you're doing is harassment." James straightened, his jaw tight. "Sir, please return to your seat. This does not concern you." Linda Miller's voice was soft but resolute. "It concerns all of us when fairness is at stake." Several passengers murmured agreement. A few lifted their phones openly now, recording without pretense. The glow of cameras lit the cabin like small flames. Emily folded her arms, her frustration leaking through. "Mr. Grant, I'll ask you one last time. Move to another seat, or face removal upon arrival." Marcus leaned back, his voice calm but unyielding. "I am not moving." The standoff hung in the air, thick with expectation. Every eye in first class was locked on the man in 1A. For some, it was discomfort. For others, quiet admiration. And for Marcus, it was something deeper, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders, demanding he hold the line not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Inside, his chest tightened with the ache of old memories. He remembered being a boy at a department store, holding his mother's hand while a clerk followed them down every aisle. He remembered being stopped by police at 20, asked what car he was driving and how he could afford it. He remembered the sting of being the only black partner candidate in his firm, overhearing whispers of diversity hire. Each memory stacked upon the moment now, amplifying the humiliation. But he would not flinch. Not now. Emily turned on her heel, whispering something to James. They walked toward the galley, their shoulders rigid. Passengers buzzed with whispers. This is unbelievable. Why are they singling him out? Get this on video. People need to see. Judge Miller leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. Mr. Grant, you don't have to endure this alone. I'll testify. My word carries weight in court. Marcus nodded slightly, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Thank you, Judge. But for now, I'll endure. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them. Minutes passed. Then James returned, his expression stony. Mr. Grant, the captain has authorized us to remove you from this seat if you refuse to comply. You may remain on the flight, but you'll be reassigned to seat 22B in economy. Gas filled the cabin. Someone muttered, This is insane. Another voice, You can't do that. Marcus's hands clenched against the armrests, his knuckles whitening. He forced his breathing steady. His father's words echoed, Guard your dignity. It is treasure. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried. You want me to leave this seat, the one I paid for, the one my name is printed on? You want me to walk past every passenger so you can prove a point? James said nothing. His silence was confirmation enough. Linda Miller's eyes glistened. This is wrong, she whispered. Charles Whitmore raised his glass again, chuckling. Some people just don't know when to stop. That was the moment Marcus realized the humiliation was complete. Not content with suspicion, not satisfied with doubt. They wanted spectacle. They wanted him to stand, to walk the aisle like a guilty man, to validate their narrative in front of everyone. And yet, Marcus remained seated, calm, still, waiting. Because though they believed they held the power in this cabin, Marcus Grant knew something greater. He held a power that stretched beyond 1A, beyond the aisle, beyond this flight, and when the moment came, he would use it. The confrontation in 1A had reached a breaking point. Passengers murmured. Cameras continued recording, and Emily Carter's rigid stance made it clear she believed she had already won. Marcus Grant was supposed to stand up, step back, and shrink under the weight of humiliation, but he didn't move. Instead, Marcus reached calmly into his leather briefcase and withdrew a slim black phone. He placed it on the tray table, screen glowing faintly in the dim cabin light. His hands were steady, his breathing even. James Walker's voice cracked the silence. Sir, electronic devices need to be stowed at this time. Marcus's eyes lifted, calm but sharp. Not this one. He scrolled, tapped, and lifted the phone to his ear. His voice was steady, almost conversational. Lisa, patch me through to Robert Hayes. Every head in first class turned. Robert Hayes, the CEO. The name hovered in the air like a thunderclap. Emily frowned, shifting uneasily. Who are you calling? Marcus ignored her, speaking clearly into the phone. Yes, Lisa. Confirm it's urgent. I need him now. Put it on speaker. Passengers leaned forward, whispers rippling. Some recognized the name Hayes immediately. Others tapped quickly at their phones, searching online. When the results appeared, Ameris Sky Airlines CEO, one of the most powerful men in aviation. Several mouths dropped open. The line clicked. A voice filled the cabin, strong and practiced. Marcus, what's going on? You're supposed to be en route to New York. The cabin froze. Emily's eyes widened. James's shoulders stiffened. Marcus's voice was calm but firm, carrying to every corner of the cabin. Robert, I am on Ameris Sky Flight 847, Seat 1A. Your crew has threatened to remove me from this seat despite a valid boarding pass. ID and payment record. They insist I do not belong here. Passengers are filming. Witnesses are present, including a federal judge. This call is being recorded. Gas rippled again. The weight of his words settled like lead. Passengers raised their phones higher, recording not just the confrontation now, but the sound of corporate accountability in real time. On the other end, Robert Hayes' voice sharpened. Put me on with the senior crew member immediately. Marcus leaned back, folding his arms. James Walker is here. James, the CEO of your airline would like to speak with you. James hesitated, his face pale. He took the phone slowly, his fingers trembling. Mr. Hayes, this is Senior Flight Attendant James Walker. We were simply following procedures for irregular booking procedures. Hayes' voice exploded through the speaker, filling the cabin like rolling thunder. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Marcus Grant is the CEO of Grant Capital. His firm holds our largest credit facility, $100 million. And you're accusing him of fraud of theft. On a public flight, in front of dozens of witnesses. Emily's lips parted in shock. Passengers shifted, whispering furiously. Phones continued recording, eyes darting between Marcus's calm face and James's ashen one. James stammered, Sir, I didn't realize that's the problem. Hayes snapped. You didn't realize. You assumed. And now your assumptions are a legal and financial catastrophe. The silence in the cabin was deafening. You could hear the hum of the engines, the faint clicks of camera phones, even the shallow breaths of passengers who knew they were witnessing history. Marcus reached calmly for the phone. Robert, I'm documenting this incident for Thursday's board meeting. We will be reviewing Ameris Sky's compliance with our non-discrimination clauses. At this moment, your company is in violation. That $100 million facility is suspended pending full investigation. Whispers surged through the cabin. A woman in 3A covered her mouth. Someone muttered, Oh my God. Robert Hayes' voice lowered, urgent, almost pleading. Marcus, listen. We can fix this. Whatever it takes. I'll see it done. This is unacceptable. And I assure you, heads will roll. Marcus's eyes narrowed. His voice, still calm, carried steel beneath it. Apologies don't change systems. Robert, actions do. And right now, the world is watching. Emily staggered back a step, her face pale. The weight of realization dawned. Her Facebook livestream was still running. Thousands were watching, maybe more. Comments poured in, scrolling so fast they blurred. Words like racism, boycott, and justice for Marcus flashed across the screen. James handed the phone back with shaking hands. He looked as though the floor might open and swallow him whole. Marcus didn't even glance at him. He turned his gaze instead toward the passengers, his voice quiet but resonant. What you've witnessed here isn't just about me. It's about the systems that decide who belongs and who doesn't. Today, the evidence is undeniable. The cabin was silent, every eye fixed on him. Robert Hayes' voice cut back in, heavy with urgency. Marcus, I'm authorizing immediate terminations. James Walker and Emily Carter, effective immediately, are dismissed from Ameris Sky Airlines. HR will confirm. The board will convene tonight. This will not stand. James's mouth fell open. Emily gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. Passengers muttered in disbelief. Phones captured every second. Marcus lowered the phone slightly, letting the words hang. Then he lifted it back to his lips. Robert, we'll speak Thursday. Until then, I suggest you prepare. The future of this airline now depends on your response. He ended the call. The cabin erupted voices, whispers, questions. Some passengers applauded softly. Others simply stared. Marcus leaned back in his seat, his posture calm once more, as though nothing had happened. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a leather-bound notebook, and began writing. Inside, though, a storm raged. Memories of every slight, every dismissal, every humiliation pressed against him. But for the first time, he felt the tide turning not just for himself, but for countless others who had endured the same in silence. He wrote one line in neat, deliberate script. Justice is not a request. It is a standard. And as the flight continued its quiet path toward New York, Marcus Grant knew the world outside was already shifting, because the man they had tried to remove from first class had just removed their excuses. When the call with Robert Hayes ended, a heavy silence lingered in the cabin. For a moment, the only sounds were the low hum of the engines and the faint clinking of ice in half-finished glasses. Marcus Grant sat calmly, pen scratching across the page of his leather notebook, his presence almost serene. But beyond the walls of Flight 847, the storm had already broken. Emily Carter's live stream, which she had started out of irritation to prove she was handling a difficult passenger, had taken on a life of its own. Within minutes, it had been shared, clipped, and reposted across platforms. By the time Marcus ended his call with the CEO, the video had already racked up more than 500,000 views. Comments poured in faster than anyone could follow. Unbelievable. This is straight-up racism. That man's calm is unreal. Respect. America's Sky better pay attention. Boycott coming. Back on the plane. Passengers who had been quietly filming now realized their videos would find an audience ready to receive them. Patricia Lopez, a marketing executive in 4C, whispered to herself as she reviewed her clip, "This is going to explode." Judge Thomas Miller leaned slightly toward Marcus. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice pitched just above a whisper, "by the time we land, this story will be everywhere." Marcus didn't look up from his notebook. "Good," he said quietly. "It needs to be." A few rows back, Charles Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. The smugness that had colored his earlier comments had drained away. He checked his phone, scrolling rapidly, watching as headlines began to sprout. In real time, Black CEO confronted on America's Sky flight. Passenger threatened with removal. Despite valid ticket, livestream captures alleged discrimination at 35,000 feet. Whitmore muttered under his breath, "This is bad, really bad." Across the aisle, Linda Miller touched her husband's arm. Her voice trembled. "Tom, this could change things. Maybe this is what people need to see." The judge nodded gravely. "It's undeniable now. No one can explain this away." The flight pressed forward through the dark sky, but inside the cabin the tension had shifted. Emily Carter and James Walker retreated to the galley, whispering fiercely. Their faces were pale, their bodies rigid. They knew the weight of Hayes's words hung over them. Terminations, investigations, public disgrace. Meanwhile, Marcus's composure radiated. He closed his notebook, placed it neatly back into his briefcase, and finally leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself a moment of inward reflection. He thought of his daughter, Layla, a high school senior with dreams of studying law. He pictured her face lighting up when she received her college acceptance letter. He imagined her scrolling through her phone later tonight, seeing her father's face plastered across social media. Would she be proud? Would she be worried? Both, perhaps. His thoughts shifted to his late father, who had spent decades as a steelworker. He remembered his father's weathered hands, the quiet dignity in his posture. Guard your dignity. His father had always said, it's the one thing they can't take if you don't give it away. Tonight, at 30,000 feet, Marcus felt that truth reverberate through his bones. He opened his eyes to find a camera still pointed at him. Patricia Lopez held it steady, her expression filled with quiet respect. She lowered it slightly and whispered, "Thank you for holding your ground." Marcus gave a faint nod. "Thank you for bearing witness." The hours passed slowly, the cabin suspended between calm and anticipation. Everyone knew that when the wheels touched down at JFK, the quiet storm in 1A would break into a hurricane outside. And then it happened. The plane descended smoothly, lights of New York glittering like spilled jewels across the horizon. The intercom crackled as the captain's voice came through, tight and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be arriving shortly at John F. Kennedy International. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate." But as the plane taxied, passengers peered out their windows. A cluster of flashing lights waited at the gate police cruisers, camera crews, airport security vehicles. The spectacle was undeniable. Phones buzzed across the cabin. Headlines spread faster than wildfire now. Viral video shows America's sky discrimination in first class. CEO calls out airline mid-flight. Suspends 100-meter deal. Hashtags trended within minutes. Justice for Marcus. Flying while black. America's sky. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, passengers sat frozen, uncertain. Then a voice rang out Judge Miller again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice so all could hear, "what happened here tonight is now bigger than this flight. You've witnessed it. You've documented it. Don't let anyone tell you it didn't happen." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. Linda Miller clapped through tears. Patricia raised her phone high, capturing the moment. Marcus remained seated, his expression composed but his chest tightening with the weight of it all. This was no longer just his fight, it was everyone's. The doors opened. Cameras flashed instantly, the burst of light blinding. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Grant, how do you respond to the allegations? Is it true you froze a 100-meter deal mid-flight? What do you want to see happen now?" Marcus rose slowly, adjusting his suit jacket, his voice, calm but commanding, cut through the chaos. "Tonight, what happened in seat 1A was not just about me. It was about every traveler who has ever been told they don't belong, about every voice silenced by assumption. The world has seen the evidence. The question now is simple. What will we do with it?" The crowd erupted in a frenzy of flashes and voices. Security ushered Marcus toward the terminal, but he walked with steady steps, his posture tall, his presence undeniable. Behind him, Emily Carter and James Walker followed, faces pale, avoiding cameras. Their fall from authority was complete, their power stripped bare in the span of hours. As Marcus reached the terminal exit, he paused briefly, turning to the cameras one last time. His words were quiet, almost gentle, but carried the weight of truth. Justice is not a favor. It's a standard. And tonight, we raised it higher. With that, he walked into the flashing lights of New York, the world following in his wake. New York woke up to a firestorm. By sunrise, Marcus Grant's face was everywhere on phone screens, morning broadcasts, and front pages. The video of his calm defiance in seat 1A had already crossed 10 million views. Hashtags like "Bau's Justice for Marcus" and "Bau's Flying While Black" trended globally. Celebrities weighed in, politicians commented, and activists declared it a turning point. But inside Amerisky headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, panic reigned. The 32nd floor boardroom was filled with hurried voices, the kind that trembled between fear and desperation. CEO Robert Hayes sat at the head of the long glass table, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. Around him, executives shuffled papers, opened laptops, and whispered urgent updates. CNN is running it on repeat. One PR manager reported, "Every network has picked it up. Our social feeds are flooded 90% negative. Stock opened 6 points down," added the CFO, her voice flat. "If this continues, we're looking at billions in lost value." Hayes slammed his hand against the table. How did this happen? How does a passenger with a valid first-class ticket end up being humiliated on video for the world to see? Silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Finally, Chief Legal Officer Daniel Brooks spoke, his tone grim. "It's not just bad optics. Robert, Marcus Grant isn't an ordinary passenger. He controls our largest credit facility, $100 million. He suspended it last night. If he pulls out completely, we face liquidity issues that could cripple operations." Murmurs filled the room, the weight of Grant's name, already a public thunderbolt, now pressed on them with financial gravity. Hayes rubbed his temples. "We can't afford this. Not financially, not reputationally. We need a response. Fast." The chief diversity officer, a woman named Elaine Richards, cleared her throat. She had been quiet until now, watching the panic with eyes that burned. With respect, "Robert, a press release isn't going to fix this. A tweet won't fix this. What happened last night is bigger than PR. It's systemic. Unless we acknowledge that and commit to change, we're finished." Several executives shifted uncomfortably. Hayes's jaw tightened. "And what exactly do you propose bring Marcus in?" Richard said. "Not as a client, as a partner. Let him define the reforms. Let him lead the change. If we don't, someone else will force our hand. Congress, the FI, or the court of public opinion." The room erupted in overlapping voices. "That's insane. He'll gut us. He'll demand terms we can't meet. Better him than the government shutting us down." Hayes raised a hand, silencing the room. His face was pale, his voice flat. "Set it up. Noon. Bring him here." Marcus Grant arrived hours later, escorted not by security, but by a small wave of cameras that trailed him from the elevator to the boardroom door. His navy suit was sharp, his steps deliberate, his calm unshaken. Behind him walked Judge Thomas Miller and Patricia Lopez, two witnesses he insisted attend. When Marcus entered, the room stilled. Hayes rose, extending a hand. "Marcus, thank you for coming." Marcus shook it briefly, his eyes steady. "Let's skip the pleasantries. Robert, the world is watching. Let's talk solutions." He placed a folder on the table and opened it. Inside were neatly typed pages, each marked with bold headers. He spoke as he slid them forward. Number 1, immediate termination of discriminatory employees already done in part. Number 2, mandatory anti-bias training for every Amerisky employee, from boardroom to baggage handlers, 40 hours minimum, certified, audited, repeated annually. The executives exchanged uneasy looks. Number 3, independent oversight committee, external, not internal. They will review complaints, audit practices, and publish findings quarterly. Transparency is non-negotiable. Hayes shifted in his seat. Marcus, some of this will take time. Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. His voice remained calm, but each word carried steel. Number 4, anonymous reporting hotline. Available 24/7, tied directly to employee evaluations. Silence will no longer be an option. Richard's eyes lit with approval. Number 5, a victim restitution fund. $50 million. For those harmed by discriminatory practices. Funded directly by Ameris Sky. Gas rippled around the table. The CFO sputtered. $50 million. That's outrageous. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. What's outrageous is treating human dignity as negotiable. $50 million is the price of accountability. Pay it now, or lose billions later. The room fell silent. Marcus's presence filled every corner, his calm restraint more commanding than any raised voice could have been. Hayes cleared his throat. And if we agree to these terms, Marcus closed the folder. Then the facility remains suspended until implementation begins. Once I see real action, we'll reopen negotiations. But know this, your survival depends not on my capital, but on your credibility. Lose that, and no amount of money will save you. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Richards leaned forward, her voice steady. He's right. This isn't just a financial crisis, it's moral. And if we act now, decisively, Ameris Sky can become the example others follow. Slowly, reluctantly, heads began to nod. Hayes exhaled, shoulders sagging. Very well. We'll draft the commitments today. Marcus, you'll have them in writing by tonight. Marcus rose, gathering his folder. Make no mistake. Robert, I don't want promises. I want proof. And so does the world. He turned to leave, Judge Miller and Patricia following. Cameras outside would capture his calm stride. The man who had walked into Ameris Sky's boardroom not as a victim, but as a force for change. As the doors closed behind him, silence lingered in the boardroom. Hayes looked around at his shaken executives. His voice was low, almost hollow. Gentlemen, ladies, we're no longer running an airline. We're running a reckoning. By the following morning, the story had grown beyond even Marcus Grant's imagination. It wasn't just a trending hashtag. It was everywhere. Cable news cycled the video of Marcus sitting calmly in 1A as Emily Carter demanded he move to economy. Clips of him calling Robert Hayes, his steady voice announcing the suspension of a $100 million facility, played on loop. Commentators dissected every frame, every word, every raised eyebrow. The New York Times headline read, Humiliation in 1A, a CEO's calm defiance. Sparks national reckoning. On Twitter, civil rights leaders compared the moment to historic sit-ins. Morning shows called him the man who brought justice to 35,000 feet. But the most powerful reactions came not from headlines or politicians, they came from ordinary people. A nurse in Detroit posted, I was once told to leave first class because they didn't think my pass was real. I stayed quiet. Watching Marcus, I cried. He spoke for me. A teacher in Atlanta shared my father worked 2 jobs so he could fly business once in his life. They humiliated him at the gate. I wish he were alive to see this. The comments piled into millions, each one a small testament that Marcus's quiet stand had awakened something collective. Meanwhile, Ameris Sky scrambled to contain the fallout, and stock continued to tumble. Analysts warned that unless reforms were announced immediately, institutional investors would withdraw. Reporters camped outside the company's headquarters, waiting for any sign of action. Elaine Richards, the chief diversity officer, found herself suddenly at the center of every meeting. She pushed forward Marcus's demands, insisting they were not just moral imperatives, but survival strategies. This isn't optional. She told the board, it's the cost of credibility. And right now, we have none. Robert Hayes, exhausted and visibly aged in just 24 hours, called Marcus directly. We're drafting the commitments, he said. But I need you to understand this will change everything. Training, oversight, public audits, it will cut deep. Marcus's reply was calm, almost gentle. Then you finally understand the price of dignity. Nomai no o. On the streets of New York, protests began. Outside JFK Airport, dozens gathered with signs, "Respect has no class. Justice for Marcus. Flying while black is real." By afternoon, hundreds filled the terminal. By evening, thousands marched through Manhattan, chanting his name. Judge Thomas Miller, usually cautious about public appearances, surprised everyone by giving a televised interview. "I was there," he said firmly. "I saw with my own eyes." Marcus Grant was humiliated without cause, and he responded not with anger, but with dignity. That kind of composure should shame us all into action. Patricia Lopez, the marketing executive who filmed much of the incident, became a reluctant public figure. Interviewed on MSNBC, she said simply, "I couldn't stay quiet. If I didn't record, they would deny it ever happened." Marcus's calm gave me courage to press record. I think it gave a lot of people courage. 1. Nemsitz. Beam E. Yan. But while admiration poured in, Marcus wrestled with the weight of it all. Alone in his hotel suite that night, he sat by the window overlooking the city lights. His notebook lay open, but for once, his pen hesitated. The responsibility pressed heavy. He had not chosen this spotlight. He had only wanted to protect his dignity on a single flight. Yet now, the eyes of millions looked to him as a symbol, a leader, perhaps even a savior. He thought again of his daughter, Layla. She had texted him earlier, "Dad, I'm proud of you, but I'm scared too." Marcus closed his eyes, the words carving deep. He whispered to the empty room, "I didn't want this fight, but maybe it was waiting for me." The following day, Ameris Sky held a press conference. Robert Hayes stood at the podium, flanked by Richards and other executives. His voice was strained, but resolute. "Yesterday, our airline failed in the most basic duty we owe our passengers: respect. We discriminated against a man who had done nothing wrong, a man whose dignity we denied. That man, Marcus Grant, happens to be a leader in business, but more importantly, he is a human being. For that failure, we apologize unreservedly." Gasps rippled through the audience of reporters. Executives rarely spoke with such frankness. Hayes continued, outlining the reforms Marcus demanded: 40 hours of mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, an independent oversight committee with public reporting, a $50 million restitution fund, a 24/7 anonymous hotline tied to employee accountability. And finally, these measures were not created by us alone. They were demanded by Marcus Grant. We accept them fully, and we know this is only the beginning. Reporters shouted questions. Was Hayes resigning? Would other airlines follow? How soon would reforms take effect? But one question cut above the noise. Where is Marcus Grant? Hayes hesitated, then answered, "You'll hear from him soon." That night, Marcus delivered his first public statement. He didn't choose a grand stage or a primetime studio. Instead, he stood in front of a simple lectern at a community center in Harlem, his voice steady, his words unadorned. "I did not ask to become a symbol," he began. I did not board Flight 847 expecting to carry anyone's cause but my own. But when they told me I didn't belong, I realized it was never just about me. It was about all of us who have ever been told the same. He paused, looking out over the packed room. Faces young and old watched, rapt. What happened at 35,000 feet was not an isolated incident. It was a mirror held up to our society. And the question is not whether we like the reflection. The question is whether we will change it. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus raised a hand for quiet. This is not about revenge. This is about reform. It's about building a world where respect is not a privilege purchased with money, but a standard owed to every human being. Ameris Sky has committed to change. Now we must hold them accountable, and we must demand the same of every institution, in every place where dignity is denied. His words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward, reaching hearts far beyond Harlem. By the next morning, his speech had been viewed 20 million times. It was clipped, quoted, remixed, even set to music. But through all the noise, one phrase endured. Respect is not a privilege, it is a standard. A movement had taken flight. 3 weeks later, Washington, D.C. was alive with reporters, flashing cameras, and whispers of history in the making. Inside the Senate hearing room, the long mahogany table gleamed under the lights. Banners of the American flag stood tall at each end, casting their shadow across the gathered lawmakers, industry executives, and activists. At the center sat Marcus Grant. His suit was simple, his expression calm, but the quiet power he carried filled the room more than any title could. To his left, Judge Thomas Miller and Patricia Lopez waited as supporting witnesses. To his right, Elaine Richards adjusted a stack of papers, prepared to testify on reforms already underway at Ameris Sky. The chairperson banged the gavel. This hearing will come to order. Today, we examine systemic discrimination in commercial aviation, sparked by the events of Ameris Sky Flight 847. Mr. Grant, thank you for being here. Marcus leaned forward slightly, microphone catching his steady voice. Thank you for having me. The questioning began. Senators recited statistics about complaints from minority passengers, about settlement payouts that had been hidden from public view. Airline executives shifted uncomfortably under the spotlight. Then it was Marcus's turn. I did not ask to be here. He began. I did not choose to become a symbol. On that night, I simply wanted to fly home. But when I was told I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for, I realized that seat was never just mine. It belonged to every traveler who had ever been told they didn't belong. That is why I sit here today. He paused, letting silence work as his ally. Senators leaned in. Cameras clicked. Dignity, Marcus continued, is not a courtesy. It is a standard. Yet for too long, airlines have treated it as negotiable, extended to some, denied to others, excused by procedures that crumble under scrutiny. Flight 847 was not an outlier. It was a mirror, and what it reflected was unacceptable. His words rippled across the chamber, carried live to millions watching. Senator Alvarez, a former civil rights lawyer, leaned forward. Mr. Grant, what do you propose? Marcus drew a breath. The reforms Ameris Sky has begun mandatory training, independent oversight, victim restitution are a start. But they must not remain isolated. We need industry-wide standards, enforced not by PR promises, but by law. We need transparency, accountability, and protections that travel with every passenger, on every airline, every day. Applause broke out from the gallery, quickly hushed by the gavel. Judge Miller added his testimony. recounting the humiliation he had witnessed firsthand. Patricia Lopez described the moment she pressed record, shaking but resolute, knowing that without evidence, the truth might never be believed. Elaine Richards presented data complaints already dropping since reforms began, employee surveys showing a culture shift underway. By the end of the day, lawmakers pledged bipartisan support for new FAA guidelines. For the first time, dignity in air travel was not a suggestion, but a mandate. War. Outside, the steps of the Capitol swarmed with protesters holding signs. Respect has no class. Justice at 35,000 feet. Standards, not excuses. When Marcus exited the building, the crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters shouted questions, but for once, Marcus stopped, turned to the people, and spoke directly to them. "This was never about one man in one seat," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This was about all of us, about mothers flying to see their children, about workers traveling for their first big opportunity, about families who save for years to sit in a seat they've earned. No one should be told they don't belong. Not in the skies. Not anywhere." Cheers thundered. Marcus raised a hand, quieting the noise. "The work is not finished. Change does not happen in a day, or even in a law. It happens in how we treat each other, every single day. So I ask you, raise the standard, in your workplace, in your home, in your heart. Raise it high enough that dignity is never in doubt." The words became a chant. Raise the standard. Raise the standard. That night, back in New York, Marcus finally sat alone in his office. The city lights flickered outside, but inside it was quiet. On his desk lay a letter in neat handwriting. It was from his daughter, Layla. "Dad, you once told me that dignity is treasure. Watching you these past weeks, I finally understand. You didn't just protect your own treasure. You made sure the world knew it mattered for everyone. I want to fight for that, too. Love, Layla." Marcus closed his eyes, the weight of her words softening the steel that had carried him through. He smiled faintly, a man who had endured humiliation and turned it into hope. Months later, the landscape of aviation looked different. Airlines announced reforms, some reluctantly, others with genuine conviction. The FAA released new standards, and early reports showed complaints declining. The $50 million restitution fund began paying claims, with stories of families finally receiving recognition and apology. Marcus never sought the spotlight, but it followed him. Universities invited him to speak. Civil rights groups honored him. Business schools studied his decisions. Yet he remained the same calm, deliberate, a man who chose his words as carefully as his investments. At a conference 6 months after the incident, Marcus closed his keynote with a simple reflection. "I was removed from a seat in first class. But what mattered was not the seat. It was the standard. And now, because of all of you, that standard has been raised." The room rose in a standing ovation, not for a man alone, but for the dignity he had insisted belonged to everyone. The story of Marcus Grant reminds us that dignity is not something handed out by others. It is something we choose to protect, even in the face of humiliation. Many of us, especially older generations, know the quiet sting of being overlooked or dismissed simply because of who we are. Marcus's calm defiance teaches that sometimes the most powerful response is not anger, but steadiness. In life, we are often placed in situations where we can choose between silence and courage. Choosing courage doesn't always mean raising your voice. It can mean holding your ground with quiet strength. Knowing your worth is not up for debate. Marcus's decision to act with dignity turned a private insult into a public reckoning, proving that one person's resolve can ripple outward and spark systemic change. For each of us, the lesson is simple but profound. Do not let others define your value. Protect your dignity as treasure, and when possible, use your strength not only for yourself, but for those who cannot yet stand as firmly. Because respect, as Marcus showed us, is not a privilege, it is a standard. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched you, inspired you, or made you reflect, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories. Your support helps us continue bringing these voices and lessons to light.